We have not identified but 3 of them, and we are still looking for the 4th. Thank you.
So thank you so much for letting me be on this panel. There's so much expertise here, and I do want to say right away that I'm not an expert on Ayotzinapa, and I didn't actually prepare an opening statement. I was thinking about the question, so I'll make just a few comments that kind of build on the prior. I totally agree. I'm very inspired by the two commentaries we've heard already, and how I think about how I'm answering the question about the unspeakability. And let me just say that thank you, Alejandra, for organizing this, because we're speaking about it. So it is addressing it and then throwing ourselves into understanding how and why could this possibly have happened, which is really what we're hearing about from both of the speakers. So I guess the first thing I want to pick up, and I do want to say that for those of you who don't know, I finished a book that I've worked on for almost 25 years. It's now with the publisher, on the history of impunity in the security apparatus in Mexico that starts at the revolution to the present. So things that I'm going to say are very much informed by the way I'm thinking about these things. Doesn't mean they're true, but they may have a slightly different interpretation than some of the other, knowledge that's being shared today. So the first thing I would say that I am totally aligned with Carla's focus on the failure of the justice system. I could have used the word rule of law, but that's kind of, that's so ideological. But really how the social contract between citizens and the state and the institutions that mediate justice and equity and that push back against whether it's criminality or impunity or violence, etc., those institutions don't function like they were intended to function, and a strong justice system functions. And again, we will talk later about the new ruling about electing judges and things like that. But so, but this second comment that I wanted to make that's against, and then the third I'll land on what I find unspeakable. I might use the word unimaginable. The second comment I would make is I agree with Osvaldo, but it's kind of, I want to say both and. It's not just this kind of exceptionalizing Mexico as a narco state. There's impunity, drug trafficking all over many parts of the world, particularly in Latin America. So I totally agree with you. And there is militarization, and of course, and especially in my book, the role of the United States hovering over Mexico from the revolution onward is a central explanation for what's been happening in the justice system. So I'm totally on board with thinking about kind of general embrace of militarization, that it's a global problem, and within that larger category, the US involvement in the history of security institutions and security practices in Mexico is absolutely central. But what I'd like to say in terms of both and, my interpretation of the archival materials that I've been collecting for so many decades has a lot to do with internal their decisions made internally in Mexico from the get-go. That there was so much relative autonomy of decisions made that collided, joined at some historical moments. Mexico fought back against US involvement in judicial affairs, drug trafficking, and sometimes they aligned. And the history of Mexico is going back and forth between those relationships. But in the process, as different regimes, so like what Alemán did, is totally different than what Fox did, or Calderón or something like that. But in the process of changing the political relationships with the United States, which themselves were determined by global conditions, including the Mexican Revolution at the beginning, then World War I, World War II, etc., those shifting political alliances or conflicts wrote themselves on the institutions of police and the judiciary, because they brought new requirements for either dealing with or pushing back against the United States. So to kind of end this, because I know we all want to hear from Anabel, and whoops, there'll probably be another round. So, without giving too much away, because there'll be some more questions, and I have plenty to say about how I think that the kind of decisions made, starting in, basically in 1913, crystallized in the 1917 Constitution, where there's a separation of different preventive and judicial police, so a fragmentation internal to the justice system. So there's a long path-dependent argument, but what my response to the thing about what is unimaginable, and I say this as a gringa who spent her life working on Mexico. Mexico is the country that I love most, probably more than the United States. I've lived there, and I have great love and affection for everybody I know in Mexico, for the culture and for the history. What is unimaginable / unspeakable to me is my narrative of how the revolution, the violence of the revolution, what was necessary to succeed against the US and other anti-revolutionaries within Mexico themselves, laid the pathway for the kind of disintegration of the judicial system, despite efforts at every historical moment to clean it up and make it work. So that to me, and just because you asked the question about the disciplines, as a historical sociologist, that pains me. Well, maybe not as a historical sociologist, if I didn't have any care or love for Mexico. I would just say that's interesting, it's a path-dependent argument. These decisions in 1910, one of the most revered revolutions of the 20th century, everywhere in Latin America, the Mexican Revolution is what people have, acknowledged, a revolution for laborers and peasants, with the U.S. hovering over. So, but what pains me is the institutional changes that brought it to the situation that it's in, of which Ayotzinapa is an example, a powerful and very tragic example of many others that are continuing to have happened long before the dirty wars. So, those are my comments.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I am Anabel Hernández. I'm a Mexican investigative journalist. I have been investigating in situ the case of the 43 missing students since October of 2014 until last year. And I understand that as in one kind of academic, how can I say, investigations, in academic view, the things that happened in Iguala that terrible night on September 26th of 2014 could be many ingredients, the US military politics and all these things that seems that was too much external influence about what happened there. But I can tell you that because I was there and I was talking directly with the victims and with the parents of the students, I was talking directly with some members of the organized crime that participate directly in that issues. I was able to talk with the lawyers of the students. I mean, I have been investigating by nine years, and I can tell you that even all these ingredients that maybe for someone can look that come from outside, the reality is that all the decisions that was taken that terrible night was Mexican decisions from Mexican officials, from Mexican government, from Mexican cartels. I mean, because if we don't just put this on the table, seems that nothing could be resolved if we don't say very clearly who who are responsible of these crimes. So what I was able to discover in all these years, I was able to discover this in just first in the first 2 months of my investigations. And then I was able to just confirm what I discovered in that 2 months that were key moments for the investigation during the last years. So what I was able to found is that that night the students were traveling in 2 buses that depart from Ayotzinapa school at 6 p.m. to go near to Iguala to try to take some buses for the protest that they were planning to do for October 2nd. That is the terrible day that they remember the massacre in Tlatelolco, made by the army, by the way, in 1968. So since the beginning, at 6 o'clock that day, all the forces of the government were monitoring and following the students. We are talking about 3 hours before the armed attack. And about this, no one is able until now to give an answer. Why the army, why the federal police, why the state police were following?
Even if we believe that, say we believe that, that doesn't take the fact that lots of people are being disappeared. So, like, the state has a responsibility in order to look for them. Of course, again, sorry, I'm gonna say something as a lawyer, we can discuss, even if that, everything, all the other disappearances are not forced disappearances, because I do believe we can one can argue that this is also forced disappearance if the state does not take all the measures in order to look for them and to prevent those disappearances. So, well, that's, sorry again, as a lawyer. Then, another crisis, the forensic crisis. We have more than 70,000 non-identified bodies as of last year. And this is new information that only came out a couple of days ago, because there is no official registries in Mexico of how many unidentified bodies we have all over the country. However, el Movimiento por Nuestros Desaparecidos in Mexico came with this figure in 2021, and we were able to know that at least there were 52,000 bodies that are not identified. But 2 days ago, Efraín Stuck, reporter that follows all these subjects, issued an article, a very important article. You can look for it. ¿A dónde van los desaparecidos? And he came up with this figure: 72,000 bodies as of 2023. So when we talk about it's very complex to talk about forensic crisis. I will leave that because I know Andrea wants to ask about it later. But we do have to take into consideration that the Mexican government has 72,000 non-identified bodies, and it has 115,000 people missing. Not everyone that is missing is dead. But taking into consideration our context, it is very likely that many of the people we're looking for are there. And the state has the obligation to identify. And what has the state done? We can talk about that later. But we have to, then we have this concept of, are we in war? We have the concept of what we define as disappeared person. We have the forensic crisis and non-identification crisis, and I'll finish, and with that I'll finish it there. We have a justice crisis. Only 7 out of 100 crimes in Mexico are investigated. I'm gonna repeat it, and this is official information. 7 out of 100 crimes, whatever crime you think about, robbery, armed robbery, human trafficking, disappearance, homicide, whatever you think about, only 7 out of 100 crimes are investigated in Mexico. That's number one. And from those seven crimes that are investigated, quote unquote, at least, well, they're in a fiscalia, only 10% of them are going to be able to get to a judge. That doesn't mean we're gonna have someone that like we're gonna have a good decision, a judicial decision. It's only 10% of those crimes are gonna get to a judge. So imagine the complexity and the impunity of Mexico. And when we talk about this, about disappearances, we only have, I'm telling you, we have 16,000 disappeared persons as of today. Can someone guess how many decisions we have, judicial decisions we have regarding disappearances in Mexico? Guess?
0.
Almost. 36. In Mexican history. So we have an impunity, we have a justice crisis that, of course, it's not solved with a judicial reform as we had it last week. But we can talk about that later. I would leave it there just to give a...
The students, since they left the school, until now, even now, the current president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, he really just tried to cover up again the facts and try to reveal a new fake story about what really happened there. And for that, because I was the one that was able to discover that the army and all these forces participate, now the president tried to is attacking me since 1 year ago, trying to say that because my investigations, all the fathers, all the lawyers, the United Nations, the Commission, the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, and everyone thinks that was the army because me. What I'm trying to explain here, and I think it's important just to see the facts. When the students arrived near to Iguala, they never had the intention to go inside Iguala. They just want to be in the perimeter, to be able to take some buses to go to the protest. What happened in that moment is that when they arrived near to Iguala, there was very ready the army, the federal police, and the state police. Exist official reports about that I was able to get for my investigation. Another thing, it's fake that just the government of Iguala was involved in the case. The students were also monitoring by the government in Chilpancingo. The army in Chilpancingo and the army in Iguala were monitoring at the same time the students. Again, no one until now can give any explanation why. No one. Of course, the army, the first testimony, the first declaration that they done is that we never know nothing about that. We wasn't there, but exist again the documents that proves that this. So when the students enter to the city to try to rescue to some students that arrive there inside one bus with expectation that the driver will let the bus to them. When all the passengers left the bus, the driver closed the doors of the bus, so the students, some like 6-7 students were there. So they called to the partners come inside to the city, and in every second, in every moment, the army, the federal police, the state police, and the municipal police knows what's happening in every minute. Exists one office that I also discovered in my book, and then other investigations confirm that, is called C4. That in this office that exists in Iguala is concentrate all the institutions related with the public security in the city. But the head of all the decisions, the head of that office was again the army. Was not the mayor, was not the state police, was not the federal police, was the army. The army has military inside there, giving the orders. So in this C4 exists, they monitor from there all the security cameras that were in Iguala at that moment. That security cameras record what was happening there at that moment. What happened? The other day, the military erased many of that videos. And some of the videos that remain, you can see that the army was directing the camera to other point to not show what was happening. The only force that was able to do that was the army. So what happened during the other hours is that when the students left the bus station in Iguala, they were traveling in 5 buses. 3 buses take a long street, and they cross by the center of Iguala, and the other 2 buses took the right place. Start shooting against the buses that were inside the city. When they tried to escape, some patrols, isn't it? Patrols block the street, and then their military in civil clothes start to shoot against the students. I was able to talk directly with neighbors that they were there. Take these testimonies took me a lot of time because the neighbors were very, very, very scared. By months, no one wanted to talk. I was going and going and going, knocking every door, because all these things happen in the middle of the city. I mean, hundreds of eyes of citizens were watching what was happening. But no one, the Attorney General office, the public ministry, no one went to the neighbors to take their depositions. No one. When the neighbors started to talk with me, they said, were people in the streets, were people that looks like military, but they didn't use military clothes. They were in civil clothing. All these things for me seems like I don't understand. The official version is from the government is that the army wasn't there. Not just that. The version of the government was the army even wasn't in the battalion. No, it was not any military in the city. That was the official version. But these neighbors were saying, no, who was shooting was the army. So I was able to get some documents, official documents, where one member of the army confessed that many of the military that night was there and in civil clothes. So everything started to have some sense. What happened is that the students were shooting at 10:30 p.m. Exists one decision to disappearance them. First than that hour, first than 10:30 p.m., some of the students that were shot, they were taken to the hospital by the police, ambulance. So if the issue was disappeared all the time, if all the time the point was disappear the students, why some students were taken to the hospital? The first objective was not disappear the students. The first objective of this operation was not a political issue. The first object, the main object to this attack was try to recover some drugs that were inside 2 buses. Okay. So my point is that when you talk about the unspeakable, this version is something that the government doesn't want, that no one knows. Even now, exists all the proofs, even for the commission, special commission of the government, that there was the army there, and the army was there because they were in the payroll of one very important criminal group that was there. And I think that try to cover this even now is, for me, as worse, as bad of what happened that time.
So now I can talk, now I'm talking at the proper time. So thank you for saying that, because it actually takes me to the second question that I wanted to ask, and there's a little preamble for everybody in case you're not familiar with the subject, which is that in July of the last year, the HIE, which is the interdisciplinary group of international experts, published their last report of what they discovered about what happened in Iguala. And they ended their involvement with the investigation because, amongst other things, they were not able to access evidence, as they themselves have said. In these 10 years, the investigative group has published 6 different reports, emitted several recommendations to the government, who in turn has met several times with family members of missing people. The government created la Comisión Nacional de Búsqueda, CNB, to which Ricardo was the former director. And yet, and then we have Anabel's book, and yet the truth eludes us. Or justice, it seems to elude us. It seems to be at the tip of our tongues, at the precipice of pronunciation. And so I wanna make a nod to Oswaldo, because here we have this situation in which the narrative of the narco taking over the state is kind of put into question, because we literally have testimonies saying the army might have been involved. We have the HIE asking specifically for texts and communications between different government organizations, not organs, let's say. So I would like to ask you, since this is your area of research, specifically narratives, have you seen any changes in the narrative post Ayotzinapa? Like, has the media sort of like taken a more nuanced understanding of that? And then after that, I would like to ask Carla, could you tell us more, based on this information, which is available for everyone online, how does this justice forensic crisis look like? Like, we are seeing this symptom. Could you tell us more about perhaps?
Forensic crisis.
Sí.
Sure. Yeah, I think the reason why, one of the reasons why we have been horrified by Ayotzinapa in particular, and how and why this case in question has become such a landmark to discuss impunity and army violence in Mexico has to do with the fact that it has been, at least at the very beginning, removed from the narrative of drug cartels doing all the destruction in Mexico, right? So the idea that all violence must be attributed to cartels fighting and the state somehow weakened or challenged by these organizations was very much interrupted by the first consigna, right? The Fuera Estado. I think that's the very beginning of it. And that's what allowed successfully for the parents and the activists to do away with the verdad histórica, right? The historical truth that the Peña Nieto government tried to sell. Right? This is not to say, of course, that there's no involvement from criminal organizations. Clearly, that has been already a question, and Anabel reminded us a lot about that. In particular, the buses that carried possibly heroin, and that was probably one of the motives for this. And so I think, in many ways, Ayotzinapa allowed us to think past the narrative of cartel doing most of the violence in Mexico. Now, this being said, I do believe that there's the risk of going back into that pendulum, right? Precisely because it is an explanation that satisfies us and everybody very quickly when we think Guerreros Unidos, might have been coordinating the entire thing, that they were actual bosses there. In many ways, depoliticizes, I think, part of the discussion. But when we look at the fact that the Mexican army is withholding evidence, that there's so much still to know about their actions and the way that this government seems to be, at least, if not protecting, at least withholding that evidence, there's much to believe, of course, of not only their intervention, but how much really of their leadership was there, aside from the traffickers, who, by the way, most of them are disbanded or don't even really operate. Right? So that's in order to answer to that. And if I just may for 2 seconds, I like Diane's idea of adding the unimaginable to the invitation of this discussion. I was just thinking that for me, the unspeakable really has to do with the fact that this violence, and I think also Carla spoke to this, keeps repeating itself. Right? And it's something that, even though we may say it, we don't really fully comprehend not only the horror that involves all these hundreds of thousands of people killed and missing, but also the degrees of difference between all of these cases and the fact that they're just really unknowable in many cases because of the lack of investigation in our judicial system. But for me, the unimaginable, following your invitation, would be a country that somehow interrupts this logic of security that I think has brought to us this governmentality in the longer history of violence in the country. So I do agree that the US is just this hovering presence, but this is also a very material presence that in a very discontinuous way, of course, with Mexico posing different challenges at different moments, has successfully taken us into this internalized moment of security, violence, and militarism in the countries. For me, the unimaginable is a country past that security state, right? That mentality itself. So it's not just a return to peace, but the doing away with the governmentality of national security, which I think in many ways is very pervasive and colonizes different aspects of society.
Diane, would you like to reply to that?
I could say something before we get to the forensics, because I think, because I want to maybe build a little bit on the question to you about narratives, which is not my specialization, but on the other hand, I am trying to create a historical narrative to tell this story. But what I think is interesting, and also building on what Aldo says, is for us to rethink, well, I know everybody probably will think about this differently, but to rethink the kind of predominant narrative about the role of the military in Mexico in general, historically. So, I mean, and I think I agree, I can't remember which of you said, well, maybe it was you, Anabel, that what was very clear in the Ayotzinapa event, in that evening, was this was not narco traffickers controlling the state, that the military was very involved in it. And what is interesting to me about this, because if you look at the history of post-revolutionary state building, it's the struggle between civilianization and militarization. So the role of the military has always been conflictive, and there's always been a narrative about it. And we could even say, and this brings us to one of your questions about AMLO, and the way in which he is kind of reformulating the narrative of the military. He first tries to do it by creating the National Guard. But we all know that's the military, right? So, and he does that, and I do want to say, if we think historically about the ups and downs of whether the military is the savior, the protector of national sovereignty versus the destroyer of it, it goes back to Cardenas. And López Obrador is trying to reproduce the Cardenas ideology. And I do want to say something really quick, I don't want to go too long, but I had a student, this project started by looking at police impunity, which very soon became something about, in Mexico City it started, it moves across the territory, but every chief of police in Mexico City was a military general. So from the get-go, the military has always been implicit in the state, but not always called the military. When Cardenas comes, we enshrine the military, becomes really important. And when I was working on this project and talking about the military involvement in police corruption, so the military involved in corruption at every part of the territory, including in Ayotzinapa, but for many decades it was in Mexico City. He said to me, this was Andres Lejeune, by the way, who's in the current administration, said, oh, but everybody reveres the military in Mexico. So what happened with Ayotzinapa is it blew that idea out of the water, but it was already, and I think López Obrador was trying to work within that, militarize the state and civil society, but not call it the military. And now, as the vote yesterday did, now it's formal again. And so this is, I think, an interesting part of this discussion, the shifting narratives, in which the military it's still almost untouchable, if we can add another unimaginable, unspeakable, almost untouchable, despite the great reporting that you've done. It's still unbelievable that people still think about the military as an important force.
And almost no one is going to the streets, because we don't have a policía, civil force anymore.
Yeah.
Almost, of course there are some NGOs and some reporters and some activists that have been almost yelling about having a militarized country, but in general, I would agree with you. At the end, most of the people don't see it, or don't think this is something, and we, it's very complex. And I would like to ask you something. When you say we have to go back to a peaceful situation, when did we have that? Okay, hay que regresar a la época de la paz. I think some parts because I normally listen to people say we are in war now. We can discuss it, but we are in war currently, or we have this conflict. We have to go back to
to a place before national security as a policy and ideology.
But what's that? But what's that?
When was that?
When was that?
I'm thinking national security as it's understood after the
but it's when we think about cartels, sorry. When is that? No, but that's talking about the forensic crisis. One day I was I want to start with this anecdote. That was 8 years ago. I went to Chile and I was with a Mapuche leader. And when he learned that I was from Mexico, I was not a commissioner for the search of the disappeared in Mexico back then. But he told me, oh, you're from Mexico? Yeah. That's where the 43 students went missing. And I was, yeah. And that happened 4 years ago, 2 years ago back then. So yeah. And how is it possible that a government cannot find 43 students? That went missing in 2014. And I think that's maybe here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that's something that you may be thinking. And when we think about 4,000 clandestine graves, can you imagine that? When you think about 72,000 people that have not been identified, many of them, not all of them, but many of them found in clandestine graves. So I would like to start there. If you have someone missing in Mexico, what's the first thing you would do to look for them? Whom are you gonna ask for information? I already talked about impunity. Are you gonna go to the Fiscalia to tell them to look for your loved one? I mean, some of them do. Most of them don't. So you go yourself and start looking for them, and when you, it is easy to say, let's go look for someone. Let's go look for someone here in Cambridge. With no, you're not an authority, you don't have the means, you don't have the tools, you have to go look for someone. And what do women do in Mexico? Mostly women. They start talking to people because everyone knows. Anabel was talking about this. No, I was saying I talked to people that live in Iguala. Of course, in my former job, you talk to people, and people know, and everyone knows where the clandestine graves, who took them, where are they, etc., etc. But how do you get that information? You have to go talk to them. Why in the world are they gonna give you information? How do you talk to a líder de plaza? How do you talk to the non-state actor? I feel threatened by you, playing cartels. To the non-state actors. They exist. To the non-state actors. How do you go do that? You have to go do that directly. You have to talk to them. You have to make them give you the information. And I'm talking about women. I'm not talking about the Comisión Nacional de Búsqueda, which also we have to do that. But I wanted to start with that when talking about forensic crisis, because we have to look for the clandestine graves. We don't even know. There's this figure that Andrea was talking about, 4,000 clandestine graves, is because at the Anabel we tried to build this database, but it's not complete. Of course it's not complete, because the information comes from the Fiscalias. Figure that out. Then, when we talk about forensic crisis, it's not only, we don't only have to limit ourselves in thinking of lots of people that are not identified. It's not only the figure, it's that we don't have the resources, and when I say resources, it's not only financial resources, but it's also personal resources, we don't have enough we don't have enough personnel, forensic personnel, that can do it, that can go work on the crime scene. But I don't know what you're thinking. I would like to know what you're thinking. When I say clandestine graves, what do you think? We have that, there are clandestine graves with thousands of bodies, with dismembered bodies, with burned bodies. So in order to work in that crime scene, you need experts, and we do not have enough experts, and they are not well paid. We don't have enough anthropologists. We do not have enough doctors. We don't have enough dentists, odontologists. We don't have enough genetists. We do not have enough, and so on and so forth. So when thinking of forensic crisis, first we have to think of how to find the clandestine graves, how to process the crime scene, who's going to process it, who's going to investigate it, because most of these clandestine graves are investigated or are supposed to be investigated by the local authorities, the fiscalías locales. Oh, and the servicios periciales, the forensic institutes, belong mostly all over Mexico to the fiscalías. So they are the ones responsible to, or at least they are obliged and responsible to identify them. And so that's the second thing. The third, when you process a crime scene, because no one thinks about this, how are you going to take them from that place to the forensic institute? When you get to the forensic institute, where are you gonna put them? Where are you gonna place them? Because we're not in Europe, we're not in the U.S., we're not gonna analyze them immediately. We're gonna place them somewhere till we have the time, the money, the will to start analyzing each body or each body part. So where do you place them in the meantime? We don't have enough, I don't know how you call them in English, it's like a fridge, I don't know how you call it. Un refrigerador,
Like freezers where you can
Freezer.
like a morgue.
yes, but like an individual place where you can place them. Oh,
The morgue slab, or whatever.
but
You have
the
to
cold place, well, we don't have enough place, it is enough, we don't have enough, we don't have where to put them, to place them. And then we do not have enough space to analyze them. You need a slab. ¿Cómo se decía? Slab?
Sí, slap. I think that was
Sorry, like all these names in English. And then we do not have enough personnel to analyze the body. We do not have enough labs, forensic labs, to even in the case we analyze it and we take the information to analyze them genetically, we do not have enough labs, genetic labs to do it. So when you talk about forensic crisis, you have to think of all of it. And after you analyze the body, you have to place the body somewhere that is you can track the body. But as we do not have enough infrastructure to do that, we send them mostly to common graves, where you might lose them. So in case we're lucky enough to identify someone some months later that was placed on a common grave, you might not find the body. So when I'm saying this, I'm saying when I talk about all this chain of the forensic crisis, of course there are places that have a better infrastructure, that pay forensic professionals better. There are some places like Coahuila or now Jalisco that are doing a little bit better. But in general, this is how it looks. And I would add, and I would almost finish with that, like even if some institutions are starting to work a little bit better, we do not share information. So you might hear in the news, or if you go talk to the Madres Buscadoras, that they go all over the country giving their blood sample. Even if their children were disappeared, let's say in Tamaulipas, they're gonna go to Nuevo León, they're gonna go to Zacatecas, Susana Potosí, to Mexico City, all over the country to give their blood sample, because we do not have a unified system that can find someone, that can identify someone's body that is in, I don't know, let's say Chihuahua, and the mother filed a complaint in Zacatecas or Tamaulipas. So that's how the forensic crisis looks. And I would finish with this. The other thing that we do not have, an extra thing, we do not have a specific methodology to identify these bodies. And we do need a different kind of methodology that normally all forensic experts all over the world have, here in the US, that is the individual forensic approach. all over the world, if I go missing in Norway, and if my body is found in Norway, well, I'm pretty sure that it's gonna be pretty easy for Norwegian Forensic Institute, for the Norwegian Forensic Institute to identify me. I'm gonna be probably one of the few 40-something-year-old brown woman with white hair and tattoos, right? That's gonna be easy in Norway. But if I go missing in Mexico, and they find my body along 100 other bodies 10 years later, I'm not gonna have my tattoos or my white hair, etc., etc. So how do you identify, how do you approach this crisis? You cannot approach it in an individual and traditional way as it's done all over the world. You have to implement a different methodology called the massive approach. And it's not a Mexican invention. This has been already proven in Argentina, Guatemala, Peru, with all these forensic, equipo argentino de antropología forense, Fundación Antropología Forense de Guatemala, equipo peruano de antropología forense, because they have to deal with all this, with a similar crisis in terms of the horrors of how people were disappeared and were disposed, and also the figures, and the time elapsed since everything happened. And this methodology was taken to the Balkans. All these experts from Guatemala, Argentina, and Peru were taken to the Balkans to implement this methodology. And after 9/11, you guys, I don't know, maybe not many of you are from here, but the US, were able, well, because you needed to create a different system in order to identify people, because you used to have the codes, no? It's a specific system used by the FBI to identify bodies. But after 9/11, they learned that CODIS was not enough. It didn't work. Because CODIS was built thinking of one-on-one identifications. And of course, after 9/11, that was not, CODIS didn't work for 9/11 victims. So the US had to build a new system in order to identify the most possible bodies with the most in front or confronted to the most possible family groups. And that's called emphasis, mass fatality identification system. So when we think of a new methodology of looking for the disappeared in a crisis such as the one we have in Mexico, we have to take all these experiences of South America, of the Balkans, with the US, in order to start identifying the bodies. We at the CNV we were able to put in the law. It's recognized in the Mexican law nowadays. In 2022, we were able to include in the law the obligation of all the Centros de Identificación Humana to start implementing this new approach, the massive approach. We started building it. As far as I know, it's only being done in Coahuila and in Jalisco right now, but that's how it looks to now. Thank you.
So we're gonna have a brief comment from Anabel, and then we're gonna proceed to the last question.
Well, my point was that the truth is that exist, I think, until now, all the elements to resolve the case. The guilties exist alive. They are not dead. They are alive. One of them, very important boss of drugs, is here in Atlanta. He was condemned and sentenced, and he's here. I think the Mexican government even haven't tried to make him confess or to approach to have his testimony. The worst part of all these nightmares that we have been hearing here, and that's why the case of the students is crucial, and I think it should be much more places to talk and forums to talk about that, is that if 43 students whom their parents were fighting for the truth every day since that happened, that they have the support of the United Nations, of the American Commission of Human Rights, journalism, and other organizations. If even them, just 43, haven't get justice, what can we expect about all the rest of the disappearance? If all the press, even the world press, was pushing, trying to put pressure on the Mexican government to try to resolve the case. If that until now is not resolved, what can we expect as a country about all that cases where the parents or where the media or where the other organizations are not focused? So that's why we have to remember this case, and that's why it's important to force to resolve it. Because I think if we are able to do that, maybe we can have some hope to the other thousands of victims.
Thank you. So for my last question, I have one last preamble. I'm sorry for the people that are coming after me, but it matters a lot. So as you may have noticed, there are no parents here, no Madres Buscadoras. We didn't invite anyone from Ayotzinapa. There's several reasons for that. Number one, today is the day, and there already have started to be manifestations happening in the capital. And second, so I didn't want to disturb that. I wanted to be there myself, actually, so I did this instead. And just as importantly is the question about Harvard. We're having this conversation here. Just for background information for anyone who's not Mexican, some of our presidents have come to Harvard. They have been visiting professors at Harvard. One of them has a PhD from Yale, for example. Kennedy School has produced a lot of people that show up in the government. And recently we had someone from the Peña Nieto administration at MIT as a visiting professor, no? So like, it's not like we don't have access to education. So it really is on us, like all of us here in an incredibly privileged space. But instead of me telling you, I wanna allow the speakers, who are way more prepared than I am, and I admire all of you, is what does it mean to be having this conversation at Harvard today as academics? And this should be like rapid fire.
Well, first, have the freedom to talk about this issue that start to be forbidden in Mexico. The government doesn't want that people can speak very openly about the case, not anymore. The government, the federal government, the president have been control all the narrative. When you talk about why the army is still looks like having approbation from the people, is because the government, through the media, are always controlling all this information. It's the government that, through the media, impose all this narrative about the army is good. The army doesn't
Violate human rights?
And nothing like that. Now the government is good. Now the National Guard will be the resolution of all our problems. And these narratives in Mexico could happen because doesn't exist, or every day is less freedom to talk about this. So this is important. I think that maybe many of you doesn't get yet how important is speak about these crimes. Because my guess, what I guess, is that in Mexico is coming the worst time with Claudia Sheinbaum and with Omar Garcia Harfuch, that will be the security chief of the national, the security, the director, the secretary of public safety in all the country. Do you know who is he? He was part of the attack of the students. He was the chief of the federal police there. And he was building the fake truth to cover his crimes. And he will be now the Secretary of Public Safety in Mexico. Is this the solution? So speak with freedom is crucial, and should be crucial, and will be more crucial in the next years.
I totally support what Anabel said. I mean, let me just say, as a faculty here at Harvard, let's not give it too much influence. But you all, I mean, if being able to have this event and this conversation allows you to mobilize more action, if you can use the forum at Harvard or any other institution outside of Mexico to raise consciousness and mobilize action, that's an amazing thing. You're a graduate of the Harvard Law School. We have students in studying democracy, studying international relations. We have students in the law school. I mean, there could be a mobilization among students to kind of try to do something about it while they're outside the country and while they're here. I mean, I again think that action on multiple scales. Harvard is not going to change the Claudia Sheinbaum's administration. And the question, but I think the last thing I'll say, Harvard alone, but just building on what Anabel said, that what you are underscoring is the failures, we can analyze why, the failures of people within Mexico to be able to really mobilize around this in an effective way. It's the judicial system, it's the new administration with Harfuch, it's the history of the fourth transformation, which a lot of people love the fourth transformation. It brought a kind of a much more radical and progressive policy. There have been struggles in Mexico about neoliberalism. So the question becomes, what's your battle? And maybe those of us outside of Mexico have a greater capacity to really take this on than people within Mexico. And that's something that could be discussed further here at the Rockefeller Center with the Mexico Committee. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I agree with Anne when she says that Harvard itself is not going to change Mexico reality. Mexicans we must do that. But coming back to Harvard and being a former alumni from here, I do believe we can individually and collectively do stuff. I myself went back to work in my country and work on that. But if you're here, you have the privilege to be here, I think we have to start thinking on how to approach not only the Ayotzinapa case or the disappearance crisis in Mexico, but how can Harvard, or how can you guys being here at Harvard can help? I would think of, I'm gonna throw it like that. I think we have to start thinking more in a more multidisciplinary way. Because we lawyers tend to try to everything's gonna be solved by changing the laws. Public policy makers tend to think like everything is, the most important thing is what they do. And if you go to talk to the forensic experts, they think that the most important thing is to solve the forensic crisis. And if you go talk to, to geeks, data experts, they think like the databases are the most important thing. And what I learned leading the CNB, the Comisión Nacional de Búsqueda, is that we all have to work together and we all have to learn from each other. And we do normally do not do that. We have to be more modest and start accepting that we do not know anything. I myself had, of course, to learn a little bit about databases, a little bit about algorithms, a little bit about context analysis, a little bit about everything, right? In order to try to give a multidisciplinary answer to this. So I think something that Harvard has, and that you guys have here, you have to walk a couple of blocks in order to talk to everyone. So I think we can start thinking of a disappearance clinic or how to give answer not only to Mexico, because this is happening in many places all over the world. So yeah, I think we have, or Harvard has the resources, human resources, to do so. And that's not gonna change Mexican reality, that's not gonna change the world, but it's gonna help think about how to start giving answers. And I think we can do it. Because if we think we can't, many people in Mexico used to tell me, or keeps telling me, like, why do you do that? Why do you, no, it's so overwhelming that why would you care? You're not gonna be able to change it. I'm at work, we're not, I myself are not gonna be able to change it. But if you don't talk about it, there are some people that care, that are prepared. We can start moving the monster. Thank you.
When you asked the question, I first had the clear picture of President Calderon coming to teach at Harvard. And just the fact that perhaps students, maybe not here, but years, a couple, maybe 10 years ago or so, were able to sit down in a classroom with him, when of course, he's one of the artificers of the war on drugs and the long militarist night of the fight against drug organizations in Mexico. And then thinking, of course, of another important Harvard graduate, President Obama, calling him as a hero, right, defending Calderon, supporting his war on drugs, etc. It just keeps me thinking of how much and how important it is to bring such discussions to institutions of power where perhaps other narratives will prevail, right? And so I believe that at some point we must bridge that gap between the institutions and the people who produce policy that ends up killing people across borders, and to bring into focus that continuity between elites, political elites, and institutions is not something that happens just once, but it continuously reproduces itself. And this is why I began my introduction thinking of just a long shared history of binational militarism. I was just thinking of a comment by Carla before when she was commenting on perhaps one of my answers, thinking when is it that we had a past of a desecuritized past. I don't think that there is one in particular we can pinpoint, but at least I would go back to the moment of 2007, before President Calderon orders the first deployments across the country. And to remember that we had in that year one of the lowest murder rates in the country that had been sustained for over a decade, including in the most violent cities during his government. I'm from Ciudad Juarez, and I kept thinking that in my city in 2007, 300 people died. We had a murder rate of about 8 for every 100,000 citizens, which was not higher than many U.S. cities. And that with the U.S. support and the war on drugs and the push for taking the gloves off, as was notoriously argued by the U.S. ambassador in one of those infamous WikiLeaks cables, my city turned into hell. And so, I keep thinking that the need for these discussions, in particular in places of power, where power makers evolve and become even more important